Hey guys, the general election in the UK is over. It resulted in a hung parliament, and the internet has not disappointed. The memes have been rolling in, and they have been hilarious. But nonetheless, Theresa May will remain the PM. She's made an agreement with the DUP, which is a unionist party out of Northern Ireland, and she's going to form a minority government and move ahead with her agenda from there. I must confess that I was kind of surprised. I thought that she would probably step down and we might have go back to the polls in a couple of months. But I understand that there is really no charismatic leader or anybody of real noteworthiness within the Conservative Party that could really lead an effective campaign in a short amount of time. So we're going to be stuck with Theresa May for a season. I figure at least 6 months to possibly a year. But I wouldn't be surprised if the party starts grooming an alternative and we're going to start seeing and hearing from that person more so in the media and in the question times and these other things as her potential replacement. But nonetheless, things are moving forward, and I, for one, am quite excited for what lies ahead. Now, with that said, I have to say I'm a little bit concerned by a lot of the rhetoric that's coming out from some of the publications, the mainstream medias, and even some of the podcasts that I listen to, where they're trying to conflate the idea that the poor showing by the Conservative Party is somehow a reflection of a referendum on the Brexit referendum. And they're trying to impose the idea that maybe we should soften our position in the negotiating table. They're trying to say that the British people may not be willing to stomach a hard Brexit, and maybe we should consider staying in the single market or something along those lines. I, for one, do not think the data actually reflects this opinion. When Brexit was the sole issue that was really being, put out by the Conservatives, Theresa May was doing some great speeches. There was fantastic rhetoric coming out of the administration. She was really showing a strong position, and she was, enjoying a commanding lead of favoritism within the party. It wasn't until the release of the Conservative manifesto that we actually saw that lead start to diminish, and it started to drift ever downwards going into the election day. Now, there were some real concerns within the manifesto that, even I, for one, was very concerned about. There were issues that kind of affected the elderly and the retirees, which again is one of the biggest voting blocs within the Conservatives, having to do with the matter of home care, and if a person had so much wealth and they would end up having to pay for their own care. But the issue was that they included the person's home in those calculations. And again, that really disenfranchised a lot of the elderly voters that probably would have voted for the Conservatives. There was also issues pertaining to school lunches with the young people. And for me, as an advocate of free speech, there was a very bizarre and ambitious plan centered around government censorship and basically the unplugging of the UK from the internet and rerouting it through some new internet that was government controlled, and there was a potential for censorship, and there was like this attack on pornography, and it's just some very bizarre and out of place policies that were in there, and I, for one, was very concerned. Now, I confess I did end up voting for the Conservatives because my philosophy was, let's kick Brussels out, get them out of our politics and our economy. Then we can turn our attention inward and start to dismantle this state leviathan that we've created, and really start to push more freedom and capitalist and libertarian philosophies at home. But I thought step one for me, the biggest issue for me, was to get a good deal for the UK out of Brussels, and then we could focus on the issues at home. Now, with that said, I was not legally able to vote for the UK referendum on the issue of the EU, but had I been able to, I would have definitely voted to leave. And there are two major reasons why I would have done that. There are a lot of other reasons, but the two big ones that I'm going to just touch on briefly, contrary to what the mainstream media might think, or even what my family is trying to push, the reasons to leave had nothing to do with racism or ignorance or xenophobia or whatever phobia you might want to attach to it, and had everything to do with the political and economic realities of the European Union. Two in particular. For me, the financial structure of the European Union was fraught with problems. When poorer nations like Spain, Italy, Portugal, and Greece joined the EU, all of them received an artificial credit boost that otherwise on their own they would have never been able to achieve, thanks in large parts to the productivity of Germany and countries like France. And as a result, the politicians were able to borrow vast sums of money that otherwise they would have never been able to access. And in usual political fashion, they went about spending lavishly, buying votes, spending on huge infrastructure projects, funding massive state pensions, none of which really brought any kind of fiscal return to any of these countries, but at the same time ended up in a cycle where the countries were just unable to pay back the huge sums of money that they'd borrowed. And we began to see a series of banking crisis after banking crisis, from the Greek crisis, the Irish crisis, Spain, Portugal, and so on, which resulted in continuous bailouts from the ECB. Even more recently, Spain, that had limits that were set upon their budgets, completely blew past those limits in spending because they knew that the central bank in the EU was never going to punish them for fear that the Spain would pass their own referendum and continue the cycle of maybe exiting the EU, creating a cycle of uncertainty. So these countries have no incentive to actually curtail their borrowing and, hold back on their bailouts because they know basically they're holding the ECB and the European Parliament over a barrel. If they try to do anything, they could all threaten to leave, and it's just going to be a continuous cycle. And the UK, as one of the biggest contributors to the EU budget, our money is going to fund these bailouts, and that money could better be served at home, or better yet, issue tax cuts to create economic stimulus. That money is just, going out to these poorer nations that are spending frivolously on basically the credit card that's been issued from Germany. And that in itself is an unsustainable model, and we need to get as far away from that as humanly possible. Now, the second major issue has a lot to do with the issue of sovereignty, especially pertaining to our borders. We all see how Chancellor Angela Merkel single-handedly invited huge amounts of economic migrants and refugees from the Middle East and North Africa into her country of Germany. And then she turns around and dictates to the European bloc that the rest of us have to take our fair share quota of these economic migrants. Now, nobody has voted for this policy. And similarly, none of the European bloc has been given a vote as to how many migrants they're forced to take. This has been single-handedly forced upon the entire bloc. It is a slap in the face to the whole concept of democracy. And, the UK, with the sterling pound being one of the strongest currencies in the world, if this policy continues, we become a target for these economic migrants who want to come here and earn pounds, seeing as it's the strongest currency in the world. Now, of course, there's going to be all sorts of social and economic fallout if we're allowed to, continue down this path. But the simple lack of democracy illustrated by this policy and many others within the EU is a sufficient enough reason to say we need to be able to control our own borders and pick an immigration policy that works for our country, and not these quasi social experiments that Germany and other countries seem to be embarking upon. So between those two issues, the financial structure of the EU and the complete lack of democracy, especially in the light of the migrant crisis, these two issues alone are sufficient for me to say the UK is better out of this political experiment. There are a lot of other reasons. I can get onto the issues of Brussels and their regulations, inability to negotiate trade deals, as well as issues surrounding the courts and the pound and all these other things. But these were the major two. If it is that you want to have this discussion, I'll be happy to have it within the comments. Please, leave your comments below. If you want to hear more of these reasons, also do that. I might do a further video on those topics. But guys, this is my response to what I see happening right here. I think the UK definitely has to leave a hard Brexit on the table. And as always, be sure to like, share, and subscribe if you'd like to see more. Thanks as always for watching, guys. Take care.